So I normally like to start with Jaya Radhamadhava, but I can't top. You already did it, yeah. I can't top that amazing performance, tabla. So, great. Thank you, Prabhu, for passing out the copies of the Bhagavad Gita. That's great. So we'll read tonight from chapter 14. And text 5.
Page 570.
570, thank you. In that one, right, there's maybe some variations, or 571. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Sattvam rajas tama iti guna prakriti sambhavaha nibhananti mado baho dehi dahinam avyayam. Does anyone want to repeat?
Sattvam rajas tama iti guna prakriti sambhava Nibadhanti mahabhaho dehe dehi namavyayam.
Nice.
Sattvam rajastama iti guna prakriti sambhava nibadhanti mahabhaho dehi dehi namavyayam.
Sattvam rajastama iti guna prakriti sambhava Nibadhanti mahabhaho dehe dehinam avyayam.
Nice. Prabhu?
Tattvam rajastamaiti gunaha prakriti sambhavaha nibadhanti mahabhaho dehi dehinam avyayam.
No.
Sattvam rajastam iti guna prakriti sambhava nibadhanti mahabhayo dehi dehi namavyayam.
Great. Anyone watching on YouTube or in the intergalactic planets who might be tuning in? Okay. The translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes into contact with nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. Purport. The living entity, because he is transcendental, has nothing to do with this material nature. Still, because he has become conditioned by the material world, he is acting under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because living entities have different kinds of bodies in terms of the different aspects of nature, they are induced to act according to that nature. This is the cause of the varieties of happiness and distress. Omegan tamarandasya ganajana shalakaya chakshur unmiliten yena taishmai gurume namaha. I was born. I offer my spiritual obeisances unto my spiritual master, Bhajinarayan Swami, who has opened my eyes, blinded by the darkness of ignorance, with the torchlight of knowledge. So, I think I start every class, I say, this is my favorite chapter. They're all wonderful, but this chapter in particular is actually really amazing because, chapter 7 to 12, just before this, Krishna is revealing the absolute truth. And so it's actually very amazing that we're getting absolute truth in sort of the nuts and bolts of how things are happening, why things are happening the way they are. Chapter 13 then is sort of this culmination. Krishna says, the culmination of spiritual knowledge frees us from material enjoyment. I'm sorry, from material entanglement. which is we are trying to enjoy, so that is the entanglement. So it's really powerful to imagine that we can just open up Bhagavad Gita and learn this conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, and then getting up to this chapter is this particular chapter 14. At the last sentence in the first verse of this chapter, Prabhupada says, thus it is expected that when one understands this 14th chapter, they will attain perfection. He says, it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. And so these are the three modes of material nature. He's saying, guna, the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance. So when I think about these gunas, I always remember Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, if you know about it, or kind of in a nutshell, Ayurveda is kind of this ancient science of wellness and health, Ayurveda. And some of the key principles of Ayurveda are the 5 elements. So we're made out of these 5 elements. The whole universe is created out of these 5 elements: air and space. Like if you open your mouth, there's space. The air that passes through air is within space, and all over the body there's space and air is passing. Lungs, like that. Fire, digestion. We're like 100 degrees. We're burning at 98.7 degrees. So there's fire is there in the body. And also water and earth. So earth is the bones, all of the matter that we're made out of. Teeth, it's the earth. And then all the fluids that pass around, pass through, or keep things moving is the water. So in the same way, so it's very interesting. So in Ayurveda, these 5 elements, it's sort of the nuts and bolts. We're created out of these 5 elements. And so Ayurveda, in attaining health and wellness, is understanding how we relate to these elements and how individually our bodies are created in these proportions. And so, not to get drift off too far off topic, but I'll try to loop back. But the idea is that when Ayurveda, if we can understand our proportions of these elements, then we can understand how to curate eating habits and lifestyle habits so that we can be, these energies can be be balanced, sattvic, or balanced energies, these 3 doshas. So not to get too deep into it, but the idea is there that in Ayurveda we are learning that we are created out of these 5 elements. We're born into the body, we have these 5 elements, and every individual has some proportion of these 5 elements, and learning what those proportions are empowers us to learn how to live in a healthy way, predominantly through eating habits, how to maintain healthy digestion, and how to, when to sleep, when to wake up, these kinds of regulative habits. So similarly, Krishna here is saying, here's absolute knowledge. Here is how the material nature works. He's saying there's 3 energies. Similarly, these 5 elements of Ayurveda, Krishna is saying, here's these 3 gunas. There's these 3 elements that are constituents. They create the material nature. And that in itself is pretty amazing. It's sort of like if you open up a hood of a car and the mechanic says, well, this is the radiator, and this is the pump, and this, and this does that. Sort of Krishna is opening the hood of the material manifestation, the material world, and saying, here's how it works. So really, chapters 7 to 14, Krishna is saying, here are the pieces of how this material nature works. And 7 to 13 is pretty much, Krishna is talking about consciousness, karma yoga, all of these elements that, time immemorial philosophers, who am I? What am I doing here? Where am I going? Right? Krishna is revealing this absolute knowledge in these specific chapters. By the time we get to chapter 14, he is now saying, well, here are the 3 gunas that create the material nature. So I think it's so important that we sort of talk about what are these 3 gunas, and to see how the qualities of these gunas, how they show up in our lives. So guna in Sanskrit loosely means operational principles. So very similarly, like how we're learning, these pieces of the material nature and how things are created and how things are happening, these gunas. The guna means operational factor. So we all are influenced. Like in this first part of the verses, we are kind of the soul, the eternal soul is brought into the material body, and we are immediately bound to the three gunas, which is pretty high-level knowledge of understanding, because from there we can sort of see it. We can see how the gunas play out in everyday life. Like, for example, early morning is the mode of goodness, sattva guna. So early morning is the mode of goodness. That's why, of course, we wake up early, we greet the deities, or we get up early and meditate. Any philosophy, any monks, all over the place, everyone, they get up early, Buddhists, everyone. So that's the mode of goodness. Even whatever time you wake up, morning, if it's in the morning, you usually feel a little bit more open-minded and relaxed. It's a sense of goodness is there. As the day goes on, Rajaguna kicks in. Action, motivation, working, doing things. There's a vibration of activity. Rajaguna, passion. Then as the evening comes in, that's like all day long, and then as evening comes in, then it becomes the mode of ignorance or darkness. So tamas guna. And so you can see, kind of bad habits kick in the evening time. Is more likely the drinking is happening and illicit activities are happening. In our culture specifically, it's very obvious that, the evening is sort of the kind of the tune out kind of mode, the darkness comes in. So it's important that we understand the qualities of the gunas, and so we can reflect internally and see the way that these gunas affect our own behaviors and what we gravitate towards. With sattva guna, the ideal or kind of the symbolic quality is happiness and knowledge. So in sattva guna, really the idea of spiritual path is to kind of transcend these other passionate and ignorant energies and kind of stay in sattva guna. Because it's like the sun, right? If we're in sattva guna, then we are acquiring knowledge, helps us see clearly. It's like the sun. When the sun comes up, you can see things as they are. No problem. If we walk outside right now, the darkness is there. It's kind of hard to see what's going on. Even though there's illumination, there's street lights, and there's, you can kind of get a sense of where you're going. But if there was no electricity, it would be mayhem, right? If these lights, what would we do? We'd be passionate immediately. So the sun is a good example of being in sattva guna, of being clear and seeing things as they are. And so Krishna says, cultivating spiritual knowledge, you can transcend these other energies and attain a sense of knowledge and enlightenment. So that's there. And then Rajaguna is symbolized mainly by passion and greed. And this is sort of like, I think, the predominant guna in society is passion and greed, working hard for sense gratification. And so actually, as you read, this is a great chapter. As you go through the chapter, actually Krishna really gets into the specifics of all three of the gunas. So this is a really great chapter. If you have a moment from this point on, it gets really into the depths of the gunas. It was really interesting. But when you read about Rajaguna, it's basically greed. And that's very much about the way our society works, is working hard all the time. You go through, I see these children, they have to go through, elementary school, 6 years, high school, 4 years, college, 4, right? Maybe 8 or 12 years, school for so long. And the goal is usually, what do you want to become? What do you want to do? And it's always kind of angled towards material sense gratification, house, material, nice car, all of this matter, sort of surrounding ourselves with matter. So much work and passion to become educated, to get the degrees, to be able to be qualified, to have the job. But then you're like by 40 or 50 years old, maybe you can start enjoying a little bit, but then there's the health. Oh, the teeth start to hurt. And there's always this constant work to maintain and sustain the material achievements. So working hard is always a huge, motivation, and the passion kind of keeps it going. And then, of course, there's the passion of always trying to tantalize the bodily senses. We're trying to enjoy through the body, through sense gratification, which Prabhupada talks about this all the time, and we always hear in these lectures. This really is a huge, we're bound to this idea of the bodily conception of life. And so we're sort of constantly trying to push the buttons and pull the levers to tantalize the bodily senses. And so as we sort of become more knowledgeable of spiritual knowledge, spiritual life, we can sort of see things clearly. So the idea is, as we cultivate spiritual knowledge, the sun comes out, we can see things more clearly. We have a better prospect of controlling the senses and understanding how we are driven by these modes, these gunas. And then tama guna, ignorance, which is characterized by foolishness, madness, laziness, illusion. My Guru Maharaj gives a great example of a camel. Like camels will grab bushes made out of thorns. They'll eat thorny bushes, and they'll just keep chewing the thorns, and they think, oh, this tastes so nice. Oh, they keep chewing and chewing. Oh, this is such a nice flavor, this bush. Oh, this is gourmet. And they're really tearing up the inside of their mouth, right? There's the blood that they're, the blood from the thorns that they're creating in their mouth. And then eventually it becomes, the pain kicks in, and then they say, then they give up the thorny bush. And then I'm had enough of that. But then eventually they heal, and then they go back to it. They go, oh, what is that? Oh, that looks good. And then they go back to the same habit of chewing on the thorny bush. And so this is a great example of how, in this mode of tama guna, of ignorance, that we will typically keep doing the same things that create harm in our lives or to ourselves, and maybe we take a break, but then we go right back. And so this kind of cycle of pursuing enjoyment in things that end up creating harm to us is sort of like madness. This is an element of a good example of being in the mode of ignorance. The very source of our happiness, the things we do that we think will make us happy, are the source of our pain. So this camel example is really good. So the idea is to sort of transcend the mode of passion and ignorance, or at least become aware of how these gunas play out in our lives. And actually, it's very similar to Ayurveda, how you can say, the 5 elements, they are elements. They have qualities among themselves. They're not necessarily good or bad. They just have their elements. Earth isn't good or bad. It's just the quality of earth is what it is. Hard, resilient. Water is flows. These are the elements. So the gunas is very similar. It's not saying that, good, passionate, ignorance are necessarily good or bad. They are what they are. They embody qualities on their own. It's just our responsibility to observe how we operate when these gunas are taking in effect, and how they're working in our lives. And so Krishna is saying through spiritual knowledge, we can have more light to see how these energies work. Eventually, we have to take our situation seriously. Eventually, we really have to, like Ayurveda, we have to understand how can we live healthy body and mind. So in a similar way, we really have to sort of take ourselves seriously. If there's a lot of passion in our lives, we really have to kind of look at it and be like, well, how come the same bad things happen? Or why do I keep getting the same outcome if I'm doing performing behaviors like this? Why do I keep doing? So really, in the mode of goodness, we can transcend and stay in the mode of goodness, and that's really the goal. Otherwise, and you read later in this chapter, Krishna explains, when someone dies and leaves their body in the mode of goodness, they actually go to a higher spiritual planet, or another higher spiritual realm, where when they arrive, then they're already fixed in the mode of goodness, and it's even higher than where they came from. And people leave the body in the mode of passion, They actually stay in the material planets, and they continue to try to achieve material possessions. They try to cultivate a big fat ego. They try to look for honor and prestige. And so this just sort of, they stay within these planetary systems of matter, of material life. And when people leave their bodies in the mode of ignorance, the culmination of their life and their energy and their focus is in this mode of ignorance, they actually go into the animal kingdom. They go down into the animal kingdom. And it's, as we know, it's 8,400,000 species of bodies. And so we have to take this very seriously. We have to respect that this conversation in the Bhagavad Gita is so that we can let the sun rise and see things clearly through our own perspective. And I think, depending on, stages of life, as I'm almost at the peak, I'm almost at 50. So I think I'm at the mountain peak, right? So now I'm like, oh boy, okay, now I see what's going on. So now maybe I'm taking things a little bit more seriously. Of course, when you're like 50, 21, 20, young children, they're not really going to ponder, maybe I should, how should I pursue what's the best path forward? They're not there yet. But luckily they have nice Brahminical parents that are bringing them to Bhagavad Gita class and hearing the Bhagavad Gita. But we do have to take responsibility. We have to really be serious about it. My Guru Maharaj gives this great example, the pinball machine. It's very passionate. So pinball machine, you put the quarter, you hit the buttons on the side, the ball goes flying around. So a lot of our life, we're sort of in this pinball machine. The ball's popping around, left, right, over, hits the flags, they spin, the lights are going off, and there's all this like fanfare, and it's really quite wonderful. This is very entertaining, the pinball machine. But most of our life is like this pinball machine, this mode of passion. Trying to enjoy, trying to get some, bells and whistles to go off, but inevitably that ball, boop, goes to the very center, in between the levers, and the ball, you lose the game. You lose the pinball machine game. But however long, no matter how crafty we are, you can sort of manipulate the machine, or you can, play the game as efficiently as possible. Still, you will lose the pinball machine game. So very similarly, this material life, we're going to leave the body, right? So there's no way around it. So therefore, it's really imperative that we take spiritual knowledge very seriously, that we accept the knowledge that's being presented very nicely in the Bhagavad Gita and translated and presented very practically through Srila Prabhupada. That we have to. It's a responsibility to do that. So then, of course, how? How can we do that? Because it sounds very nice. Oh, okay, now we have, from chapter 7 through 14, here is all of this knowledge is revealed, sort of under the hood of the material nature, how things work, the three gunas, how they play out, self-realization, karma yoga, transmigration of the soul. All of this is revealed. All of the questions that have ever been asked in every philosophy, here's the answers right here. One element of ignorance is that we defend our ignorance. Oh, I'll believe I have some other way of thinking about it. Oh, I'll do vinyasa yoga, I'll be fine. Oh, I'll believe in nothing, I'll get there, somehow. So we try to manufacture also different ways that will attain self-realization, or I'll take it seriously later in life. We kind of concoct philosophies, or we sort of, put aside the responsibility of really just taking knowledge and truth as it is, Bhagavad Gita as it is. The sun is out, you see things clearly. So that's just interesting, So I think it's important that we see how the three modes of material nature, how we are affected by them, and how sometimes we will get in front of ourselves from making progress. So that element is there. So how? So there's, of course, the great book, The Perfection of Yoga. It's also one of my favorites because it's only 48 pages, so It's a real simple one, short read. What's that?
Large print.
Yeah, large print. It's really easy to get through. So I speak for myself, I have a passionate energy that can take over. So it's hard for me to sit and read, hundreds of pages at a time. I think a lot of us probably are like that. But this is a great book because it's only 50 pages and you can refer to it. But some great points here. And I wanted to just read one part. Because how is important, how do we do this is really important. Otherwise, it's just sort of great ideas. And even if we can think, yeah, this makes total sense. And it does make total sense. But once we leave the class or you go into our lives, what can we do? How do we do this? How do we cultivate sattva guna? How do we get into this mode of goodness so that we can be clear and see things clearly for our own benefit? And by the way, the process itself is pleasurable. The process of cultivating knowledge and coming to the temple, seeing the deities, in and of itself, chanting Hare Krishna, we experience contentment. We experience happiness. So it's not so prescriptive like, like pill mentality. If you do this thing, you will get a result. This is it's a whole lifestyle. It's a way of living. It's the art of living that we incorporate spiritual practices so that we can very slowly and progressively come to sattva guna in knowledge. So in the Perfection of Yoga in chapter 4, and I brought an extra copy, so if someone wants a copy. He raised his hand. Did he raise his hand? Okay. No problem. You win. You get a copy. So in the 4th chapter, it's titled Yoga as Body and Mind Control. So this is sort of how we can do this, how we can practice. In this age of quarrel and disagreement, Kali Yuga, the only way of spiritual realization is the chanting of the names of Krishna. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. It is generally thought, at least in the Western world, that the yoga system involves meditating on the void. But the Vedic literatures do not recommend meditating on any void. By meditating in this manner, always controlling the body, mind, and activities, the mystic transcendentalist attains to the kingdom of God through the cessation of material existence. And so this is sort of this idea of impersonalism. It's very common that, like I was mentioning, people really are sort of avoiding, the work. And so if we say, I just believe in, the effulgence or the light or the void, then it's just sort of, I don't have to do anything. I just believe in, some abstract nothing. And that's so convenient because then you don't have to do anything, right? But this is a really popular, idea. I actually hear it quite a bit. I teach yoga on the side, on the weekends usually, and it's very common in the yoga community where if you start to try to talk about spirituality, people really kind of shut the conversation really quick. And it's just, it's very impersonal. You don't want to go there. You would think that if you're in a yoga studio, yoga practitioners, that they would be inclined to want to, hear about spiritual knowledge or, talk about sadhana and stuff. But it's really a kind of a touchy subject, which is kind of ironic. But it's this defense of wanting to surrender or give up sense gratification, passion, rajaguna, or really be committed to making pivotal changes to achieve contentment and happiness. So the irony, we want happiness, but we don't want to do anything, to get there, to earn that. So, and then one other part I wanted to read about this idea of yoga as body and mind control. Prabhupada says, there are so many rules and regulations involved in the proper execution of yoga, and most of us can hardly give up a simple habit like smoking. In his discourse on the meditational yoga system, Krishna proclaims that yoga cannot be properly performed by one who eats too much or eats too little. One who starves himself cannot properly perform yoga, nor can the person who eats more than required. One should eat moderately, just enough to keep body and soul together. One should not eat for the enjoyment of the tongue. When palatable dishes come before us, we are accustomed to take not just one of the preparations, but 2, 3, 4, and upwards. Especially when the samosas are around, right? Or the gulab jamans. I mean, I'll take 5 or 6, no problem. So our tongue is never satisfied. But the tongue is never satisfied. But it is not unusual in India to see a yogi take only a small spoonful of rice a day or nothing more. So this is just a good example of moderating, the tongue in diet. And so this is a good example of what we can do. And so kind of controlling the tongue. And so how is the other kind of obvious or the other pathway of how we're able to control the senses is by our sadhana. And so we know that Krishna consciousness, that we are following the best we can, 4 regular principles. When we take initiation, then we take vows to the guru that we will do these things. And so one is no meat eating. Another one is no illicit sex life. Third one is no gambling. And the fourth one is no intoxication. And so typically people, what's that?
I said no coffee.
Add no coffee, no caffeine, right? I mean, caffeine is a huge one, right? I mean, it's totally normalized in society, like coffee, everyone's, and you can't meditate on coffee. What it does to the kidneys, right? Back to Ayurveda, I mean, the kidneys and the liver are usually blown out in Western society because caffeine and processed foods and medications, the liver is gone. It throws out the hormonal imbalances. It messes with digestion. Everyone's intolerant, all these intolerances and allergic reactions. It's related to the, of course, these habits, food. It's the food, is the bottom line. Diet and exercise. You don't hear it very often nowadays. Well, now there's COVID's back, it's coming back up. There's all these fevers everywhere coming back, right, everywhere. Now we're kind of, here we go. But no one says, simply eat well and exercise and amplify your immune system, and you're less likely to get sick. You don't hear that anywhere. Well, now I'm saying it. Well, then we've got the internet and the global community. I'll say it. Be healthy, live healthy, and you have stronger defense from any of these germs and fevers and the Rona. No one says that. It's interesting. Why not? So our regulative principles, these regulative principles, is a way to facilitate being able to be as spiritually, physically, mentally healthy as possible. People hear no. No sex, no gambling, no meat, no intoxication. Forget it. No caffeine, forget it. No meat, oh no. I like chicken once in a while. Forget it. The whole idea is just completely, people can't even conceive of it. But we should hear yes. Because when we control the tongue, when we're vegetarian, that's, have a healthier body, right? A cleaner body. Of course, in our society, diabetes on the rise. Heart problems, cardiovascular, off the hook, off the charts. The meat eating, right? The diet, uncontrolled, eat whatever you want, however much you want. The buffets are everywhere. So the vegetarianism, we say yes to, we become more, less negative karmic reaction, from not eating meat, we become healthier, the body is healthier, and then we are not getting the karmic reaction, of course, of eating the animals. No intoxication. We're not bringing toxins into the body. And those toxins aren't filtering through our consciousness, which informs the way we operate. So we actually enjoy a sense of, clear consciousness because we don't take intoxication. Sex life, we have controlled sex life. But with the practice of that, we create self-discipline. So we become more disciplined in not just in the sex life. That's the way that we practice, but self-discipline shows up in other ways. And gambling, sattva, we say yes to becoming more truthful. So by not gambling, by not cheating, by not being obsessed with, trying to get ahead and gambling, we become more, truthful and honest. So really these 4 regular principles, we're becoming more clear mind and body, clear mind. We become more truthful and honest with ourselves and others. And we are, we are regulated. We have more self-control. So the regular principles really brings us to a platform where we can read and understand and actually realize knowledge that's coming out of the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam in our Vedic philosophy. And really that's the starting point. Really practicing regulative principles, chanting Hare Krishna regularly, it's really just creates the platform. It kind of rolls the carpet out by which then we can open the Bhagavad Gita and then have discourse, and we can understand what's going on, how things are happening the way they are, and ultimately facilitates happiness in our lives. The process itself is pleasurable, and we are experiencing a sense of calmness, peacefulness, sattvic element within the process of the spiritual path. So, I'd like to read the verse one more time. Material nature consists of 3 modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes into contact with nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. So really, we really want to try to see how we're conditioned by these modes, understand how the modes play out in our own lives, follow regulative principles, so that we can be clear and calm and clean to fully understand the knowledge that is coming out of the Bhagavad Gita. So, and of course, chant Hare Krishna. The sound vibration is sort of like an antenna, right? It's sort of like tuning in. I think we're all old enough. You remember radios? Remember radios? When you turn the knob and then the little dial goes across, you have to kind of like find where, you got to turn it around. It's sort of like, the 4 regular principles. You're sort of tuning, you're practicing, you kind of find the signal. Chanting Hare Krishna, you sort of you find it, you hear it, and then you leave it there, and you're kind of connected, and you can hear the reception is there. So chanting Hare Krishna, and hand is in the bead bag. You're chanting the whole time. It's really transcendental. It's so nice. So let's chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra 3 times together, and we'll close the class. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you for listening. If you have are there any questions or reflections? Jai. Anyone in YouTube world? No? Jai. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a nice night. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.